Today was the day to meet Gina's parents, and right now I was getting grilled by her father, and Glenn Carano said, "I know of you kid on social media, you're a famous fitness and a martial arts teacher on YouTube, and you're already a very rich billionaire, so you've done well for yourself, so maybe you could convince my daughter to give up this fighting business and stay home with you and retire and become a regular housewife." And then I said, "With all due respect sir, I support whatever your daughter wants to do in life, besides I am a martial arts master and I'm training her to become untouchable, so soon you won't have to worry about her anyway because she will be just fine, and I love your daughter sir, and I want to marry her, and I also want her to be the mother of my children." And then Glenn Carano smirked and said, "You look healthy and very strong kid, so you wouldn't happen to be any good at American football by chance, would you?" And then I said, "I am naturally talented, yes." And then Gina said, "Dad, leave him alone, I don't want you and your friends playing football with him." And I said, "Hold on Gina, I want to play football with him and his friends, and don't worry, I promise I won't hurt anyone." And she said, "I'm not afraid of you hurting anyone, I'm afraid they might hurt you a little bit." And then Glenn Carano said, "Good, I'm glad you agreed son." And then I said, "I agreed to a friendly football game." And then Glenn Carano called his old football buddies to his house and he said, "Hi, could you get the fellas up here to play football with my new son-in-law?" And they asked questions and Glenn said, "Yes, he's a young punk that thinks he's naturally talented, I'm about to show that he's wrong." And I smirked and Gina said, "Babe, why are you smiling?" And I said, "It seems like your father is a bit cocky and arrogant." And Gina said, "Please don't hurt my father like you did Anderson Silva." And I said, "I promised I won't hurt him, but I'm not saying anything else about what's going to happen." And then his friends finally got here and then we played football inside an indoor football gym with a padded floor, and instead of me tackling them I just took the football and dodged them, and I made a lot of touchdowns and they couldn't catch me since I was way too fast. And then the rest of the older men said, "We are done, no more, he won." And then Gina's father Glenn said, "Now I feel very inferior and I don't like that feeling." And I said, "Well, you asked for it sir, and I'm sorry, but someone had to win, and 7 against 1 of me isn't exactly fair." And then I shook Glenn's hand and I said, "Let's call it a day sir." And then Glenn Carano said, "You know, whenever you're ready I could tell the NFL about you and you could become a professional football player." And I said, "I will think about it, and I won't take too long to think about it either, but it was a great workout and a fun game, I enjoyed it." And then Gina said, "Thank you for not tackling them." And I said, "I wouldn't hurt Gina, I told you I wouldn't." And then Glenn Carano called the NFL later that day and he told them about me and he said, "You have to see this kid play football, I've never seen anyone this fast or this strong before, he may very well become the best quarterback I've ever seen, I want someone to recruit him, please just come down and test him out, Bill." And he said, "Fine, I will send some young pro football players to test him out then." And then Glenn Carano smiled and said, "Good, I want to see what this kid can do for the new Dallas Cowboys team roster." And he said, "I bet this kid could carry the entire team on his shoulders." And meanwhile I was talking to Gina Carano about it and I said, "I think it would be a good idea if I have 2 jobs because I always kinda wanted to play pro football, Gina." And she said, "You don't have to." And I said, "Yes, I know, but I want to, and besides, football isn't that hard at all for me." And she said, "Yes, I saw that, and I also saw what Anderson Silva did to your face." And I said, "I'll be fine honey, I hope anyway." And then as time passed I became a Dallas Cowboys football player, and I am also a professional UFC fighter, and I actually defeated Rich Franklin and I became the middleweight division UFC champion, and I started getting paid more. And then I asked Diana White if I could please fight Michael Venom Page in the UFC, and he said, "Yes, definitely, and you might need to move down a weight class though." And I said, "That's fine by me." And he asked, "Why do you want to fight Michael Venom Page?" And I said, "Because I don't like him, he's cocky and arrogant, he's a asshole, he needs to be taken down a few notches." And Dana White said, "I agree, and honestly I understand why you knocked out Anderson Silva. Also I saw what Anderson Silva was trying to do to you, and a lot of the fight fans agree with what you did." And I said, "Yes, well, no one should act like that in the ring, it's dishonorable to all great fighters." And Dana White said, "You were raised by a traditional Asian family, so that's why you don't like people that act that way."